All right, guys. So what we started yesterday was 341. So we went over some of this already. Went over simplifying the expression. And we worked through these here, and we ended up finding is that I is, by definition, the square root of -1. It's our imaginary number. And when solving these here and simplifying these here, we realized that whenever we have that negative inside the radical, inside that square root, when simplifying, will come out as I, leaving us with the square root of 25. Now the square root of 25 is 5, giving us 5i, and that worked out nicely. However, the square root of -72, well, again, just like the previous one, the negative will come out as I, leaving us with the square root of 72. Now, the square root of 72 does not reduce as nicely as 25, but the 30xs will simplify radicals for us. So we can tell it to take the square root of 72, and it tells us that it's 6 square root of 2. Or for us, it's 6i square root of 2. We always want to put the I after the number, but in front of the radical. Questions on this here? Because we did that yesterday. What we also went through was our powers of I. And we figured out when evaluating powers of I to the n, we take that n, whatever the power is, and divide it by 4. And we'll get a number into decimals, or at least one. We're not so much worried about the whole number, we're focused on the decimal. Because if the decimal is 0.25, it's going to reduce to I. If the decimal is 0.50 or 0.5, it's going to reduce to -1. If the decimal is 0.75, -I and 0.00, 1. So for this one here, we can take our exponent of 27 and divide it by 4, which is going to give us 6.75. So since we have the 0.75, it tells us this reduces to -I. So our answer is -I. And we did go through some of these here. Now, out of all of our powers of I, the one that's the most helpful to remember or know is I squared. I squared is one of the ones that comes up the most, and I squared is -1. Because anytime we have a power, an exponent attached to I, it has to be simplified, it has to be reduced. We cannot leave I squared or I to a power. We have to reduce it back down. And part of the reason for that is because really I squared, I is the square root of -1. So we're really saying that we're leaving the square root of -1 to an exponent. We have these radicals and exponents. We really can't leave them together. So we simplify if possible. Is my only real logical reason for that. But if we have I to a power, we're going to reduce it. What we did next after that was our addition subtraction. We worked through some of these here. We kind of like the fact that the graphing calculator will add subtract for us. It works with I. But where we stopped off was multiplication. Now, it wants us to write our answer in standard form. It said that previously. Standard form is just this. A plus BI. A plus BI is standard form for any complex number. All that means is the real number. The term without I goes first. The term with I goes second. That's all standard form means. Now let's look at this first one here with multiplication. All we're going to do is distribute. So the first thing we're going to multiply is 4i and -6. Well, 4 times -6 is -24. And we still have our I. Questions on this so far? Now the next thing we're going to do is 4i times I, which is going to be plus 4i squared. Questions on this so far? It's almost like the same thing we would have done if it would have said 4x instead of 4i. We treat it the same, almost as a variable. Except the only thing we can't treat the same is with power. So I squared, we can't leave it as I squared. Because I squared is -1. So we have to replace I squared. We have to simplify that power. So I squared is -1. So I can replace that I squared with -1. Well, 4 times -1 is -4. Questions on this here? We have one last step. The only thing that we have left to do is get it in standard form, which means our -4 has to go first. The -24i has to go second. That's standard form. Questions on this here? We're ready for the next one. So for the next one here, we need to distribute the 15i. So we can do 15i times -1, which is negative 15i. Then we can do not 15i times 2i. Almost. That's 15 times 2. 30i squared. 30i squared. Now we can't leave I squared, but I squared is what? -1. We have to simplify our I squared. I squared is -1. So the last thing we need to do is multiply 30 and -1. What's that going to give us? -30. Minus. Now, -30 and our -15i are not like terms because they don't both have I. So that's it. Now, there I cut out a step because we could just switch it as we simplify. But that's it. Questions on this here? Questions on anything we've done so far? We ready for the next one? This here is essentially the exact same thing. We just have a few more multiplications or multiplying that we have to do. Because the first thing we're going to do here is multiply the 9 and -4, which will give us -36. And then we're going to do our 9 times 7i. And 9 times 7i is going to be plus 63i. After that, we can do -2i times -4. Well, negative times a negative is a positive. 2 times 4 is 8, and we still have our I. So -2i times -4 is positive 8i. And lastly, -2i times 7i. -2 times 7 is going to be -14. And our I times I is I squared. Questions on this here before we move on to the next step? Now, there's a few things we can do. One, we do have like terms, our 63i and 8i. We can add those together and get 71i. Minus 14. We can't leave I squared, because what is I squared? -1. So what that tells us is that we have -36. -14 times -1 is positive 14. So we have negative 36 plus 14, and negative 36 plus 14 is negative 22 plus 71i. Questions on this here? Any questions on any of this here so far? Okay. We ready for the next one? I believe this is the last problem of the day, or last problem of this note sheet. Well, again, we can start off the same way we did the last one. We're going to distribute the 4. We're going to multiply through by 4. 4 times 11 is indeed 44. 4 times 8i, 4 times 8, 32, and we still have our I, so 32i. Negative 132, I believe. 11 times 11, yes, would be 121. So 132. And lastly, negative 12i times 8i is going to be negative 96i squared. $44. $32i minus 132i. Negative 100. I. Now I squared is negative 1. Which is just going to change 96 from negative to positive. And lastly, we'll add 44 and 96 and get 140. Questions on this here? All right. Clear all that out. Well, second decimal.
So we can do any one of those problems on the calculator.
Yep. Calculator can do addition, subtraction, multiplication. So, and we can use the 30xs to get our simplifying radicals. It just takes a step. We got to get the negative out. But we know that the negative inside the radical is just I. We put it down, then simplify the rest.